If you're tired of the standard business and marketing fundamentals, frameworks, and funnels, you need a little mischief. Get ready to turn up the volume on the CEO Mischief Maker podcast, where you access conversations with seasoned business owners who have smashed through mindset barriers, innovated the standard boring business and marketing playbooks, and executed future-paced strategies with bleeding-edge tools and tactics to micro-fail their way into massive success and growth. We are Mindset Impact Strategic Catalysts helping innovative entrepreneurs focus. We are CEO Mischief Makers. Ready to make a little mischief? Hey, CEO Mischief Makers, MKJ here. And if you are enjoying my conversation with Steve so far, I implore you to listen to this next bit of information I need to share. Steve has an organization called neveralonepandemic.org. So you can visit neveralonepandemic.org. And I ask you to consider the following. If your son or daughter breaks a bone during a pandemic and they need to have their bone set in the hospital, and you as their parent are not allowed to be by their side, 5 years old, 8 years old, you're not allowed to be by their side. You're not allowed to give them their favorite teddy bear. You're not allowed to support them at all in the name of the pandemic. They are afraid in a hospital, having their bones set and casts put on. What is that going to set them up for in the future for any kind of doctor or hospital visit, with doctors masked up and looking like aliens all around them and no loved one there to protect them and comfort them? What about your relative who has a heart attack, who has congestive heart failure, who has any kind of condition that requires them to be hospitalized, and you cannot visit at all, regardless of their actually test results for the particular virus or issue, or your test results? Even if you're negative, you still cannot visit, you cannot support, you cannot hold their hand through difficult, painful times, or even death. This is what happened to Steve, as you are no doubt hearing in my conversation. And I need you, I implore you to visit neveralonepandemic.org and participate in this process so that this never happens again, so that no one suffers and dies alone. You, your loved ones, your neighbors, we should never be forced, regardless of a test result. Even if your test results are negative, you should not be forced to have to go into a hospital and painful situation without the support of at least one of your, we're only asking for one person to have access, to have it in law, that at least one person, not just visiting hours, not just at one particular time, it's 10 minutes, during any day, one person should be allowed to give support to their loved one at all times when they are in the hospital. I don't think this is extraordinary. I don't think this is difficult for hospitals to accommodate. There are measures, protective equipment, all kinds of things that you can have to be able to have the dignity to support your loved ones or have them support you, no matter what's happening in the outside world. I hope you support this. I hope you understand this. I hope this sparks a conversation. And I hope you can look at your neighbors and your family and ask, what if I were in the hospital? Would you be able to come visit me and comfort me? What if your child were in the hospital? Would you be able to go visit and comfort your child who is scared to death without their parent or any loved one with them? Please support neveralonepandemic.org. Thank you. Hey there, Mischief Makers, MKJ here, and welcome back to the conversation. If you have not listened to Monday's episode, I really strongly encourage you to do so, because it's going to set up what we're going to talk about now with my amazing guest, Mr. Steve Reiter. Hey, how you doing, Steve? Ready to Ready to keep on rocking this mic together? Just loving
Let's
this.
crush this. Let's crush this.
Yeah. So you talked about last time we went over your mindset shifts, major mindset shifts, and the work that you've done on yourself to allow you to not just not burn out anymore with the work that you were doing in radio and podcasting and all of that, but also to care for your wife and your two young sons, and then the whole situation you went through with her illness and COVID, and during COVID and all of that. So take me through and continue the conversation to after your wife's passing in, I think you said it was May of 2020.
Yeah. May 19th, 2020.
Yeah. And then what process did you go through after that? How did you, because we all are going to go to the same place. We're all going to experience death in our families and our lives around us. But you have taken that to a very different place. So tell me the result. Tell me what happened afterwards.
So May 19th, I got that call. Your wife's gone into cardiac arrest. You need to get up here now. I go up there. A friend of mine, John Ramstead, very, very dear friend. He met me at the hospital, walked in with me, made sure I would be good to go to drive me home if necessary. Hardest thing I've ever done, saying goodbye to my wife like that. As soon as I got home, I broke the news to my boys. I told them, I said, your mama didn't make it. She's gone. Caleb, my 13-year-old at the time, immediately jumped up. He's like, I got to go ride my bike. All right, you do that. Matthew just sat there on the couch and he stewed and stewed and stewed, just sat there. It was about 15, 20 minutes of him just sitting there. And I sat next to him and I just put my arm around him and I said, what's going on in there, bud? And I tapped his chest. And he said, Dad, I'm equal parts sad, equal parts pissed because the last 3 weeks of my mama's life were stolen from me. During that 3 weeks that she was there in the hospital, those 21 days, friends started sending me links to other stories of people dying alone, people being forced to recover alone, kids in the emergency room that were forced to be alone. MK, there was a 7-year-old boy, if I remember right. A friend of mine sent it to me on Twitter. 7-year-old boy broke his arm, if I remember right. Mom wasn't allowed to be with him, and they wouldn't even let the kid have his teddy bear. What kind of fear is that young man going to have the rest of his life of hospitals and doctors?
Trauma.
And the medical
system? That was a trauma. Yep. That was a trauma. He's
gonna be in his 40s.
Yeah.
Start to experience some chest pain and be like, just ignore it, just ignore it, just ignore it. And he's gonna die, and he's gonna leave his wife without a husband and his kids without a dad.
Yeah, that's right.
And if not him, I guarantee you there are going to be more than a handful of kids that went through the medical system. They were in the hospital alone, that are going to fall into that camp. And that is exactly what's going to happen. And it's all going to be traced to the fact that we didn't have a patient's right to have a loved one with them.
That's right.
My question for the medical establishment since the very beginning, because one of the reasons that they told me they wouldn't allow me in is because they didn't have PPE for visitors. And they wanted to control the infection rate. But the PPE one, I pushed back. I said, well, where did you not see this coming with SARS?
Yeah.
Did you not see this coming with swine flu, with bird flu, with Ebola, with MERS, with West Nile, with Zika? Did you not? Every single one of those major media, big media would slam it down our throats. This is coming. And you would hear experts like Bill Gates and people from the NIH saying, and the CDC saying, global pandemic is the thing that we fear the most.
Yep.
So where was the plan? Where were the stockpiles of PPE?
Right.
I got into it one time earlier this year. I got into it with the lobbyist for the Hospital Association. We were trying to run some bill trying to run some legislation here in Colorado to protect the patient's right to visitation. And all I'm asking for is one screened, loved
Right.
one, advocate, caregiver, someone to hold their hand per day with no time limits, or at least reasonable time limits, and reasonable, in my opinion, visiting hours are from 8 to 8. That's when they should be able to be in there. Should be able to be in there 8 o'clock, leave at 8 o'clock.
Yep.
Because when hospitals started allowing visitation, they're like, we're letting visitors in. But all they were letting visitors in were for 1 hour. One visitor, 1 hour. 23 other hours in the day that things can go wrong, that people need love and attention. What about that? I mean, I have a friend of mine, her elderly aunt was up in Greeley, which is northeast of Denver. Elderly aunt's in Greeley, and her cousin, the daughter, is a nurse. So she would take that 1 hour to be with mom. And she'd tell the other nurses and the staff, hey, I see bed sores developing. She's clearly dehydrated. There's this, there's that, and we need to get these addressed. She'd go home, come back the next day. Bed sores are clearly getting worse, and she's still dehydrated. And and here's the thing, MK. When you shut down visitation like that, suddenly the nurses and doctors and staff that interact with those patients are the ones that need to provide the medical support, that emotional support, not just medical support. They're also feel like they need to provide some emotional support. And when you are overworking and overstressing people in their jobs, suddenly they don't have anything in there left for themselves.
Of course.
And when they have nothing left in there for themselves, the patient suddenly becomes a threat to their physical, emotional, spiritual well-being.
Well-being, yes.
And so all of a sudden, then it starts to turn, and I've heard this so many times, where nurses and doctors are hostile to that patient, because what they're asking for under normal circumstances will be reasonable. But because overworked, overstressed, overburdened, it suddenly becomes a threat to them, and they become hostile towards that patient.
Right.
So I got into it with this hospital lobbyist, and I said, did not see this coming with Zika, MERS, swine flu, bird flu, etc.
Yeah.
He was like, well, Steve, we were reliant on the federal government to have those stockpiles of PPE. To which I said, why not monitor that just to make sure?
Just ask.
Once a year. Just check in. How are we doing? Well, it got defunded. And then there was this global supply chain interruption because it was a global pandemic. To which I went to him, I was like, dude, did you not see this coming? That a global pandemic would interrupt the global supply chain. So why are you so reliant on stuff from China and Southeast Asia to get over here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no one wants to take responsibility for mistakes. No one wants to when it comes to this.
Of course,
and we have to ask those questions. What mistakes did we make, and how can we do it better? Because otherwise, the next one, whether it's 100 years from now or whether it's in 2 years from now, we're going to make the same mistakes. We're going to make the exact same mistakes. So all I've wanted is one screened loved one advocate caregiver per day with no time limits or reasonable time limits. That entirety of the visiting hours, because believe me, I fully understand the need to protect doctors, nurses, staff, and other patients, because Elizabeth was one of those other patients.
Correct.
But when you have a study that came out of a hospital in Boston where they had 945 patients that they polled and kind of figured out who had COVID. They eliminated who had COVID when they got to the hospital. They also eliminated who was asymptomatic but had COVID when they got to the hospital. Every 945 patients that went in without COVID, and they figured out, okay, did any of them catch COVID while they're at the hospital? You want to know how many? Take a guess.
How many? 10.
One.
One.
One. One patient got COVID while they're at the hospital. It came in from a spouse, his wife, who was asymptomatic, and it was before universal masking. So would the masks have decreased that chance enough that he would have gotten it? Which masks are a whole other thing, because do we have, if our masks, if we're going to try and really control the spread of a respiratory virus, we need to have real data on how effective those surgical masks are.
That's right.
And if they are not, we need to start pouring money into developing masks that can help reduce. So that way we are protecting everyone.
Yeah.
Because the N95 and KN95 masks, that's technology that's over 25 years old.
Right.
25 years old. We don't have any more breakthroughs when it comes to masks.
Yeah.
I mean, believe me, I don't want doctors to get sick. I don't want nurses to get sick. I don't want anyone in a staff to get sick.
That's right.
And I don't want the patients, because Elizabeth was someone, because of the pulmonary hypertension, because of the lupus.
Yes.
The lupus, she was an immune compromised position, taking immunosuppressants.
Highly at
because
risk.
of the pulmonary hypertension, a lung disease. She would have been among the most high risk COVID patients there were. And so we took all those precautions. Once we found out she was negative, I would rarely go out. And most of the time we get groceries delivered by friends, dropped off by friends, or we'd have local Safeway deliver the groceries to us, or the Walmart or wherever. Relied a lot more on Amazon to get stuff.
Yeah.
And we took every precaution that we possibly could in order to make sure that it wouldn't come into our lives.
Right. So you, and that's just, I mean, there's so many other things. We could have so many more conversations around this subject, but you've basically created a nonprofit, specifically Never Alone Project, to specifically advocate for what you just said. One loved one, caregiver, during for a reasonable time every day. And we don't even, I know we don't have to inherently talk about the benefits of that. I know you have talked privately in other conversations about the benefits of being there for your wife in 2014 and actually being able to provide for her that closeness, that human contact, that human touch. And we don't have to give studies, but we all know this as human beings. We just know this inherently, that when we have someone around us showing us love, no matter what, we are better. And if nothing else, if just that, we know that. So I understand that specific purpose of this particular nonprofit.
We've all known this, but the numbers are striking. 50% increase in health outcomes when you have a loved one there. And if you don't, there was one study that said the most lonely and isolated, socially isolated elderly patients were 2.5 times more likely to die than their most socially connected peers. 2.5. There was one that blew me away. It was a study about breast cancer patients across the spectrum in age. The women that had someone there versus the women who didn't have someone there to walk through that treatment with them and walk through that recovery and everything. The women that didn't have a community around them to walk through that treatment, MK, they were 5 times more likely to die prematurely. We know that having a loved one there aids in the healing process. And we also know, I've got a chaplain friend, my grief counselor. It used to be a hospital chaplain. And she told me, Steve, it's not just the benefits of that physical touch, but having a loved one in the room, they get a better quality of care because the nurses are a little more attentive, the doctors are a little more attentive, and that little more, and asking those questions, those follow-up questions, and double checking to make sure, okay, what's this medication for? Why is it needed? And pushing back sometimes on some treatment, which has been a big problem in the last year and a half. Because of the isolation, people have been forced into, without informed consent, many times often ignoring the medical power of attorney. So you have a sedated patient, informed consent needs to be to that person that has medical power of attorney, and they're being ventilated against the patient or against the medical power of attorney, their wishes. They're being given drugs that they otherwise wouldn't, whether it be narcotics or whatever. Remdesivir, which is shown to cause organ failure, renal failure in many people. This is going to become a really big story, and hospitals are already losing these cases. Class action lawsuits are starting to develop around the nation for people that were treated against their will, that were forced into taking remdesivir and experience some kind of organ failure or renal failure. Remdesivir, which is, for those that don't know, was one of the COVID treatments when hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin became bad in the eyes of the media.
Yeah.
Because the president just happened to talk about them. All of a sudden it's no, but meanwhile, remdesivir is this great drug, but it has all these awful side effects. So this is going to become a really, really big story. But for Never Alone, our goal is to mobilize a community to raise awareness about this issue, so that way we can ultimately see legislative change that protects a patient's right to at least one screened loved one advocate caregiver per day, with no time limits or reasonable time limits. That is the ultimate goal. And it's one that this isn't a life mission unless it takes me my entire life to get it done. Because I've had this goal of, as soon as we get that good federal legislation, shutting it down. I don't need to do this. I've started to reconsider that, and instead of just shutting it down, becoming the president stepping down as president and just becoming the chair and handing it off to someone else, to where it's just an awareness campaign. Because even in the state that has the best patients' rights protection, hospitals are still locking people out, at least were earlier this year, locking people out. And it was a matter of it was either them not knowing about it or being afraid to report that the hospital was locking them out because they were fearful of retribution from the hospital. So even if we get this, we may still need to continue, because there is that awareness campaign that people need to know that this is a right, that they have this right to have a loved one. But it really is a human right to not be forced into a solitary confinement kind of situation when you were really at your most vulnerable, when you were sick, potentially dying. It's a human right.
Okay, hold on. If your mindset was shifted, you were inspired to innovate, and you were spurred into action, don't just move on with your day. Focus, my friend, and take a few minutes to visit CEOmischiefmaker.com to learn more about the value that was shared with you today. Please act now and create some CEO mischief of your own.